This conversation will be very interesting because what is currently being widely discussed in every kitchen, every office, and every family is, of course, Russia's serious threats to move to a new level of escalation. However, in addition to this perspective, there is also a version being voiced that these threats from Russia represent the final and most critical stage of escalation in this war, after which Putin will be ready to move toward a formal peace agreement. And this is partly confirmed by what President Zelensky said at the meeting with deputies that took place yesterday. Various reports are currently circulating regarding this possibility, suggesting that by autumn we might reach a halt in the war. There is certainly such a distinct possibility, but we still leave it as just a possibility, right? Because war is notoriously difficult to predict. How do you personally evaluate and assess the complex events that Russia has started to unfold now?
I see them somewhat differently, from a different point of view, actually. What has happened during May of this year? Certain processes have taken place that will indeed affect the Russian leadership, and they have become noticeable in Russian society. What are we talking about here? Putin spent years building the image of an alpha male, a guy with a bare chest on a horse taking pictures with bears, a strong leader, mighty in the eyes of the world. But now he has turned into an old man who, through diplomatic channels, is asking for a ceasefire on May 9th so that, God forbid, he doesn't have to run away from a Ukrainian drone. And the cameras didn't capture it, so he wouldn't show weakness, but the weakness has already been revealed. Moreover, the weakness is already evident in the fact that our drones are systematically reaching the territory of the Russian Federation, and the country he was supposed to demilitarize in 3 days didn't even have the capability for such strikes 4 years ago. Today, we cover half of Russia's territory, we fly beyond the Urals, we strike Tuapse, Leningrad, their economy is burning. And if you occasionally watch Russian propaganda, you can see there are some very telling moments in how they react to these developments. Watching a Solovyov clip, there's a frequent guest expert standing there openly admitting, we can no longer tell the population that nothing is striking deep into Russian territory. You understand? He says they can't lie anymore. He says that's it. Kyiv is hitting us now. We can't talk about it. And they're looking for some explanations as to why they've come up with this idea that it's all the United States helping. And in fact, all of this that's happening now in Russia, they're sensing Putin's weakness. He brought the war onto Russian territory, promised a blitzkrieg, promised dominance in Europe and the world. But now the war is already in Russia, and they have to respond somehow. They can't protect the Russians. They lack sufficient air defense, and what they have protects Moscow, Valdai, and Putin's other residences. And so they had to come up with some kind of operation, like how should they respond to Ukraine? So this is their great retribution, declaring war on garages, kindergartens, shopping centers, and markets.
But this will not affect our long-range strikes in any way. And the concept, we've talked about this for a long time, is stop striking Ukraine with long-range weapons, and we will stop striking Russia with long-range weapons.
This is exactly what I believe the president is laying the groundwork for in the fall. I honestly find it hard to believe. Sorry, but yes, I try to look at the situation realistically. I don't see any signs today that the Russian military will stop or that Putin will want to end this war before the new year. But the fact that we will be able to heavily saturate the Russian skies with our drones and intimidate them before winter, in other words, to say, look, we already know how to survive the winter, but do you? And our drones keep flying and flying effectively. And the fact that we can deliver a significant blow, for example, to their energy sector, that too could become a bargaining chip. I think that by autumn there is a realistic possibility, at least that's what I would like, that we will be talking about a long-range ceasefire because, well, the Russians are feeling our long-range strikes more and more, and it is effective. In other words, we are achieving results with these strikes.
Well, their problems with fuel are already becoming increasingly severe. There are long queues and shortages at gas stations. They don't sell more than 20 liters, so they've already started to feel the impact.
Yes. And if we also move on to targeting their energy sector in certain aspects, that is, with mirror strikes, I think this could significantly influence the socio-political mood within Russia. Because no matter what, the elites do pay attention to this, they still do. And I'm not saying there will be some kind of uprisings or anything like that, no. But these processes, it's still not North Korea there, they still react to society because there are unstable regions like the Caucasus, Dagestan and others. So there are things they pay attention to. And that's why, in reality, these intimidations are just a new element of information and psychological pressure from the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs because nothing is changing. Last year, there were the same attacks on the same days, and a year ago, on May 24th, there were 20 ballistic missiles on Kyiv, hundreds of drones. So, well, it was a serious attack as well. And they are repeating it. That is here, Andrii Tkachuk wrote, the spokesperson for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and he says it very well and systematically. So the Russians, who will do what they did last year, are being presented as a new type of escalation. No, they're just trying to intimidate and put pressure on Ukraine.
Well, it's already clear that when the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs talks about strikes on the Ukrainian defense industry in Kyiv, it's just intimidation. It's more of a psychological special operation. But what is happening from the Belarusian side, because we've discussed the possible threat and possible escalation more than once. But you see, Macron has already spoken with Lukashenko for the first time in 4 years. He issued a warning that there could be significant consequences if the Belarusians decide to become involved in the war, and if supposedly some provocation happens at the border. We're not talking about the full-scale involvement of Belarus right now. And could there be some provocation at the border in the near future, which could be prepared as a new escalation of this war? What do you think?
I personally think it is actually quite simple and straightforward. A great deal has already been said about this, both by Zelensky and the State Border Guard Service. I like the comment made by Pali, the deputy head of the president's office, on this matter. He says a simple, straightforward thing. As long as a puppet regime for Russia exists in Belarus, there is a threat from there. However, we need to look at the real situation directly, at what is happening along the border. At the moment, there is no accumulation of personnel being observed that would indicate any systematic actions from the side of Belarus, or even the involvement of Belarus, like it was in 22, so that Russian troops
pass through.
There is none, just provocations. And is Russia not currently using Belarusian territory for relay stations? And is it not using Belarusian training grounds, Belarusian infrastructure, the Belarusian defense industrial complex? All of this is already happening. So nothing new is happening. This is also an element of them preparing a certain element of pressure on us. For what purpose? In my opinion, this is their attempt to stretch our forces and defense units so that we would, say, transfer a few regiments from Donbass or from another direction to the north, giving them an opportunity to take advantage of the situation. Because we also have certain limitations in personnel and resources. If we redeploy some units to the north, say to the Chernihiv region, or reinforce Kyiv region or Polisia with more troops than are currently there, then obviously this will give the Russians an advantage in the sector from which we withdraw these forces and units. I think that's exactly what they would like to achieve. And also I believe it's right from our perspective to talk about this to the whole world. We need to somewhat reboot European diplomacy because over the past few months it has stalled a bit. There just aren't any processes happening in Europe right now.
Listen, this is an important moment. Macron is calling. The last time he called was on February 26th, 2022. And now he is talking to Lukashenko again after 4 years.
It's a big moment.
This isn't just some typical everyday moment at all.
No, it's not an ordinary moment. I mean, I think, look, Macron, well, there's another aspect to this whole story. Emmanuel Macron is, as we all know, soon coming to the end of his very second term. Obviously, he envisions himself as being...
He was focused on Lukashenko, like how to get re-elected.
No, honestly, it's funny. Actually, he wants to see himself continue in some European process, whether in NATO or the EU or somewhere else. I mean, he's still a young politician.
Euro MP.
Yes, a European politician. Obviously, he doesn't want to weaken his influence or his opportunities. After the ice breaks between the United States and Belarus, when the states lift some sanctions and Belarus releases political prisoners. Well, Macron is thinking, well, I also need to do something there to make an appearance and at the same time support our opposition. Because if anything, this is a great friend of ours for Ukraine, a serious key partner of Europe. And he will definitely support our policy and our activities. So I believe there's nothing extraordinary here. But this is a good proper step from Macron. And I believe that as long as there is no significant buildup of personnel on the Belarusian border, there is no need to be overly worried. As for provocations that some sabotage and reconnaissance groups might enter or perform some actions, they're already doing that, so there's nothing new here and it's happening. In other words, there is nothing here that we are not prepared for. Regarding false flag operations, supposedly a provocation from our side to make it look like they did it, that could happen, but I think our intelligence will warn us and the world in advance so that we don't react. There have already been such cases.
Unexpectedly this morning, the Chinese released a formal statement. China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs stated that it urges Moscow not to strike Kyiv. Well, that's an unexpected statement, because we are used to considering China a partner of Putin, and we know the scale of military and industrial assistance that China...
It feels like the doves of peace have flown out.
I think maybe the point is that the Chinese embassy is located 200 meters from the parliament and the government. Maybe...
By the way, that's actually really funny. You know, Lavrov gives Rubio a signal like evacuate the embassy. So why don't you give China such a signal when it's right in the center of Kyiv, next to the decision-making center where the entire government quarter is?
Katerina Maternova, the EU ambassador to Ukraine, said that European diplomats will stay.
Of course, they'll stay because it's a way to put pressure on Europe in order to weaken the support of European countries and in general overall support.
But are European diplomats happy about this?
Well, yes. And why did China get so involved in this discussion after all?
I think that during the conversation between Trump and Xi Jinping in China on May 14th to 15th, there was something discussed regarding the issue of the Russian-Ukrainian war. And I think that things are definitely not all that good because right away a trip by Putin to see Xi was scheduled. And I think that certain signals were conveyed that the war needs to be ended and that the Russians, well, are not managing to pull it off. Because, well, indeed, on the battlefield, directly on the line of contact, the Russians have had some tactical successes, but not enough for them to really claim anything significant. Furthermore, they are definitely telling Putin that they will surely capture the Donbass by the end of this year. But this has been happening for 3 years in a row already, and there are no realistic chances that...
We would see them filming staged videos in their own rear, showing how they storm and capture our positions and cities. So it's not surprising here. The Moscow Times reports that Russia is preparing to announce a mobilization. Since the beginning of 2026, Russians who are summoned to military enlistment offices to update their information are increasingly being forced to sign mobilization orders, documents with instructions on where and what to bring in the event that mobilization is announced. There are grounds
For
preferably right in it. Are there any solid grounds for this in Russia?
Look, this is a very complicated question because there has already been an attempt to announce mobilization in Russia. It ended with very serious outrage and they rolled it back. I actually believe that mobilization in the format that currently exists in Russia will continue to take place covertly, just as it is now. Right now, Putin has issued a decree that forgives the loans of those participating in the so-called special military operation. That is, you understand that they are looking for different ways to replenish their personnel. Because what happened? Last year, there was a surge in recruitment into the Russian army at the beginning of the year. Why? Because the whole world started talking that now Trump would end the war. They were like, aha, let's quickly join the Russian army, sign a contract and get the money. In half a year, there'll be a deal and we'll go our separate ways. But it didn't turn out that way. And they had very serious problems at the end of last year with recruiting people. And we can clearly see this both from the detailed intelligence reports and from the broader military establishment as a whole. They simply can't manage to recruit the necessary personnel that we are successfully neutralizing and eliminating on the front lines and in the rear. And they are currently facing an even more substantial and pressing challenge with their drone forces. Because during this year, they want to expand this specific branch to 160,000 personnel. But they were counting on young people, on tech specialists, on students, and they don't want to join. And they have a big problem because for the infantry, so to speak, they can recruit marginalized people, those who have debts, alcoholics and other segments of the population who aren't really... That works for the infantry. They send them on meat grinder assaults. But for unmanned systems forces, they need city dwellers, and they really have problems with that. So what I'm getting at is that they're looking for ways to improve mobilization, to improve recruiting. But will there actually be a full-scale mobilization? I think not, because that would be a very serious blow to Putin and to the regime.
Thank you for being here with us in the studio. Andrii Tkachuk, officer of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, political scientist. We hope you won't leave our soldiers empty-handed because people have donated via the QR code. Let's see how much after the broadcast.